Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. This is the news before my Frontline update. I'm going to have to separate these into separate videos today because there is just too much discussion on the news part to do, and it would make my Frontline update video massively long. So you're going to have to wait a little bit for that. But here is some news that should influence how you interpret the Frontline update and has an impact on how we understand the war on a daily basis. So the first place to go, as ever, is the official release of the Ukrainians for the Russian losses the day before. Usual caveats: accuracy, propaganda. Russia don't provide an equivalent. There has been another, or it's been another day yesterday of high Russian personnel losses, 760, which is above average. 6 tanks, 10 APCs, 14 artillery systems. That is huge. In fact, I saw a video, which I'll show you later in the extra, of an SPG and a towed artillery. I think the SPG was towing the towed artillery, taken out in one precision artillery strike. So that's 2 off the bat. So yeah, 14, that's huge because that's 14 pieces of artillery that can't be firing against the Ukrainians. Massive. It's a zero-sum game there. Aircraft, 1 helicopter Ka-52 was taken down. 6 drones and 7 vehicles and/or fuel tanks, or 7 vehicles that could be comprised of fuel tanks. That's a pretty good day for the Ukrainians. We have seen a stabilization in some of the fronts, and they are hitting, say, Solidar and Bakhmut areas with quite a bit of artillery and drone munitions. And I think I've seen certainly a lot of footage of huge losses of Russians in that area. Of course, there will be losses of Ukrainians. I just haven't seen the footage. But man, the Wagnerites and the Russian forces in general must be just taking huge losses to make those gains up around Bakhmut. Okay, so yeah, Ka-52 was taken down, and an experimental Merlin, a reconnaissance drone. So that's good for the Ukrainians, obviously. And really, most of the news is going to be about what is being provided to Ukraine, or what is likely to be provided, given Ramstein's happening on tomorrow now. And that could open the doors for a massive bunch of military aid. But just before we get there, it's interesting to see what the Serbians think. The Serbians generally side. Well, there is pro-Russian sentiment in Serbia. I spoke to RS Zub. Please go and check that interview out on my Atypical Philosopher channel. It is a fantastic interview. Really, really enjoyed that. And he's actually visited Serbia and trying to get a handle on opinion there. And he said it's not that they are pro-Russian, it is that they are anti-NATO because of the NATO involvement in the Serbian conflict some years back. So that's an interesting dynamic to consider. Anyway, for us, Crimea is Ukraine, the Donbass is Ukraine, and it will remain so. We have said from the very beginning that we cannot and will not support Russia's invasion of Ukraine, said the Serbian President Alexander Vucic in an interview with Bloomberg. That is a massive statement, and it's very clear. And it's great that Serbia are standing with Ukraine there. I know some Serbian some of the Serbian population are uh, being persuaded somewhat by Wagner. Wagner are operating in Serbia to recruit Serbian uh, people to their mercenary force, and that's drawing on that anti-NATO, possibly pro-Russian sentiment. So yeah, it's good though that the leader is positioning Serbia in that way. Talking of NATO, the Secretary General Stoltenberg, Jens Stoltenberg, has stated that they have seen intelligence that seems to indicate Russia is planning a large-scale offensive or large-scale offensives against Ukraine in the coming months. This will be the much vaunted offensives, spring offensives of Russia and indeed Ukraine, and it's who will get there first, and whether you'll get some kind of advantage by being first in the offensives, and whether Bakhmut is causing problems for a Ukrainian offensive because they're having to divert resources and personnel to Ukraine, or whether they're going to go ahead irrespective. So there you go. Talking about Stoltenberg, this is well worth listening to because this in Davos at the moment, the World Economic Forum, Stoltenberg lays out very clearly what his hopes are.
It is extremely
Um,
important that President
so
Putin
I
doesn't
don't. I
win this
think
war.
this is actually there's no
And it
sound
is
here, so I'll read
extremely
this out.
important that
So it's extremely important that President Putin doesn't win this
President
war.
Putin doesn't win this war. Partly because it would be
Partly
a
because it would
tragedy
be
for
a tragedy
Ukrainians,
for the
but it would be
Ukrainians, but it will
very
be very
dangerous
dangerous
for
for
all of
all of
us.
us.
Because then the
Because
message
then
to
the message to
authoritarian leaders,
authoritarian
not only to
leaders, not
Putin,
only
but
to
also
Putin, but
other
also other
authoritarian leaders,
authoritarian leaders,
is
is that
use
when they
brutal
use brutal
force, when
force,
they
when they
violate
violate
international law,
international
they
law, they
achieve what they
achieve
want.
what they want.
And that would be a
And
very
that would
bad
be
and
very
very
bad
dangerous
and a
lesson.
dangerous lesson.
It will
It
make
will
the
make
world
the
more
world
dangerous
more
and us
dangerous and
more
us more
vulnerable.
vulnerable.
And that's the reason
And
why,
that's the
if
reason
we
why,
want
if
a
we want a
negotiated,
negotiated,
peaceful
peaceful
solution to the war in
solution
Ukraine,
to the war in Ukraine, we need to provide military support to
That's the only
Ukraine.
way.
That's the only way.
Weapons,
Weapons are the way to
they
peace.
are the way to peace.
And that sounds sort of counterintuitive, but it's exactly right. You want to get Ukraine in a position of power to then start the negotiations. They can't start the negotiations until they have given Russia a bit of a military hiding. And then they say, right, and now we go to the table. Now, what are we going to negotiate and how are we going to compromise? Bearing in mind that we are in the power position. Uh, Talking about weapons that have been sent and will be sent, weapons that have been sent, Bulgaria, it's just turned up that Bulgaria have been secretly supplying ammunition to Ukraine. Rights to vote. This was not done directly. The United States and Britain paid for the transportation cargo flights went through Poland. It is noted at some points Bulgaria covered a third of the needs of the Ukrainian troops. So Bulgaria are perhaps the unsung heroes here. Yes, there are big nations like America, obviously, but they've got huge stocks of military equipment. Their spending on the military is phenomenal. Some claims that they spent over the last however many years the equivalent of the next 70 countries combined in terms of military expenditure. They have deep pockets and a massive GDP. Bulgaria, less so, one of the poorer countries in Europe, and yet they're in an interesting position because they can still manufacture Soviet era ammunition, shells, and whatnot. So they have been an incredibly important component of the supplies and the military aid going to Ukraine. Fantastic. Long may that continue. And in fact, the FSB has been in action. There was a couple of explosions at the Arsenal um, manufacturing plant for ammunition in Bulgaria because the FSB were active there. You know, the Russian secret services trying to stop Bulgaria do their thing. Latvia are going to be providing more military assistance to Ukraine. Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, missile systems, helicopters, machine guns, and ammunition, and unmanned aerial vehicles, so drones. That's very useful. Today, expect an announcement from the Swedish press from Sweden. They're going to announce that it looks like they might give 12 of these archers. These are wheeled self-propelled guns, 155 mil guns, apparently, or so they claim, the best counter battery fire in the world. So if they get 12 of these, the Ukrainians, that will be hugely beneficial. They're rather like the Caesars, but it would be great if they get them all at once, not in these dribs and drabs. Bosh, there's a load. There's what you need. Go and put all those 12 somewhere. We will obviously train you up first, and then put them somewhere where they can be of the greatest utility. And apparently, they might also be giving a bunch of combat vehicle 90s, CV90s. These are pretty decent infantry fighting vehicles that have been around since the 90s. And as ever, they can come in different shapes and sizes, or at least with different configurations, and they will be incredibly useful for the Ukrainians. Canadians yesterday have promised another 200 Senator APCs. These are awesome looking vehicles. They certainly look very cool and uh, like they can do a good job. They'll hand over 200 armored Senator APCs to Ukraine, says the defense minister, and 8 are already donated and actively used by the Kraken units. So these are the special forces units in Ukraine. So obviously, if the special forces units are using these, they must put some store in them. The first 100 will already come in January. So that is this month, 100. Brilliant. 200, the other 200, or the other 100, that should say, not long after. So fantastic from Canada there. Surely there's a good course in NATO metaphysics, says Michael Weiss, about what qualifies as direct war with Russia and what does not. When is a HIMARS not a HIMARS? What is the escalatory essence of the Panzer Howitzer 2000 versus the Leopard 248? I'm saying this before I talk to you about long range missiles and tanks. This is a bit of a philosophical argument, and in fact, what happens is probably the West themselves have imposed this arbitrary line on what's escalatory. And the problem is, as soon as you say that, oh, we're not going to provide tanks or offensive weapons because they're escalatory, then Russia says, yeah, absolutely. If you provide those things, that will be escalatory. No, no, no. You've given Russia the ammunition to say that. Like, why did you ever say that? So now there's this idea of like certain bits of kit being escalatory and others not, but it's utterly arbitrary and in fact kind of incoherent. So we can provide Panzer Howitzer 2000s with these like 30, 40 kilometer ranges of artillery, and then HIMARS with 84-kilometer range, but then suddenly something over 84 kilometers is escalatory. Well, what about those two things? I mean, HIMARS were a massive game changer. That wasn't escalatory. But these self-imposed uh, dividing lines are causing a headache because now there's this massive argument about tanks. Germany is saying we won't provide Leopard 2s until America provides Abrams because the worry is that's escalatory. What? No, it's not. UK have provided Challengers. Now, Challenger 2s. Now that you've said it because it's escalatory, Russia have got on the bandwagon and said, yeah, we're going to start doing X, Y, and Z if you provide these tanks. But Germany or the West, we are the people that are providing the Russia with these talking points. It's so annoying. So anyway, that Michael Weiss playing on that idea and discussing that idea of the arbitrariness of those lines. The USA is preparing one of the largest packages of military aid to Ukraine, but without tanks. According to the Pentagon, the decision not to provide tanks is not related to the fear of escalation in relations with Russia or the risk of American weapons reaching Moscow. This is hugely important. So they aren't going to provide Abrams. So Germany are going to say, well, we're not going to provide Leopards. Actually, what America should do here is provide like 2 Abrams. Just go, here's a couple of Abrams, and the floodgates are open. Now we've done what you wanted, and this is political blackmail. But we're going to go through it. Who's going to miss 2 Abrams? So there you go, 2 Abrams. Germany, over to you now. That could be it. But what is important here is this idea that, well, first of all, America are going to provide a massive military aid package. Sorry, I thought I'd highlighted something in here, including these striker vehicles. These are APCs, but they can come with lots of different configurations. You can put guns on top, like a cannon on top. You can put, probably tow missile systems, different kinds of machine guns, and so on and so forth. But strikers will be really useful. They're the only thing that America hasn't given, apart from obviously main battle tanks. Uh, and it could be that they are going to provide, if not ATACMS, then other ranged munitions, but not tanks. But it's not because of the fear of escalation and the fear of that tech getting to Moscow. It's because Abrams are actually a bit of a nightmare. They use different fuel. They've got jet turbine engine. There's a huge learning curve for them. They're pretty heavy tanks, so on and so forth. The logistics footprint for them is a problem. We'll talk about that in a second. So, speaking of range, says Phillips O'Brien, very interesting New York Times article just published. Biden administration is softening on their opposition to giving Ukraine the range capability to hit Crimea, getting there just painfully slowly. So again, it's like this whole escalation thing. We get there anyway. We give these things. Russia doesn't really do anything. It's because they've got empty threats. All they've got are biological weapons and nuclear weapons. That's all they can go to. And if we can assume that they aren't going to go to nuclear weapons, then let's just give them everything. And it appears that America is softening its approach to range weapons. We might see ATACMS, we might see other pieces of kit, such as the these little bad boys, the GLSDB, ground launch small diameter bombs. These are pieces of munition, pieces of ordnance that have been adapted by Boeing and Saab to be able to be fired out of things like Gimlers, HIMARS, and give existing munition a new lease of life and a far greater range. Although Trent Telenko says, I'm afraid I am in the I will believe it when I see it camp on this weapon. So, and if it does show up, it will not be soon. The idea is that these might well be promised today. And I remember months back when it's like, oh, they could be spring 2023, and everyone's like, oh, that's too long. Well, that's kind of here now, on the way. So yeah, let's do it. They've got a range of 150 kilometers, and it can hit a target within a radius of 1 meter. This is what Trent Telenko. These haven't been used on a battlefield yet, so he's saying, "I'll believe it when I see it." Big promises. Um, and as you know, some people are saying these are excellent alternative to ATACMS. Thing about ATACMS is, and they won't be the panacea, but they'll be super useful, even if they can be hit out the sky and whatnot, because they're going to be phased out anyway. So what are you going to do with them? You might as well send them to Ukraine to be used in the way that they were designed to be used. So I'd send ATACMS and these pieces of kit. The Gimlet's range now for the use of these sort of weapons. So at the moment, that's the kind of range you get with HIMARS. And what the Russians said is, so this is Frontline, the red line is Frontline. So the Russians said, okay, let's get our big depots back to about 100 kilometers back from the front line, and that keeps them safe. And only smaller depots in HIMARS range. And that's how they adapted to HIMARS. You start giving them these new munitions or ATACMS, and then suddenly you can hit pretty much anything within the Ukrainian border, give or take. And so that will be super useful for the Ukrainians, obviously, and they will be able to get into Crimea to some extent, although not say Sevastopol or Simferopol, but Jankoy up here, Henichesk. So useful positions to be able to hit. So the US is prepping for this major military package. But as I said, the reluctance, they won't be sending Abrams, or at least it doesn't appear that they will. The reluctance is due to the logistical and maintenance challenges of the tanks and not over concern that their transfer could escalate the conflict, one of the US officials said. This is in Politico. This person noted that the US has helped Ukraine obtain Soviet-era tanks and supports the British decision to send around a dozen of its Challenger 2 tanks. So yeah, as I said already, likely to contain strikers, eight-wheeled armored fighting vehicle, or APC, depending how you define it, which have the range of roughly and GLSDB, which have a range of around 100 miles, obviously more in kilometers. And a long-range army tactical missile system, it will not be included, says this article. So ATACMS not to be included, but I don't see why not. That's according to two of their sources. The administration believes Ukraine can change the dynamic on the battlefield and repel Russian invaders without those missiles. Well, but yeah, but they'll be able to do it even better with those missiles. I just don't get it. An offensive weapon that can fly up to 190 miles, said Colin Carl, the Pentagon's top policy official. Our judgment to date has been that the juice isn't really working the squeeze on the ATACMS. You never know, that judgment at some point could change, but we're not there yet on the ATACMS, Carl told reporters after a trip to Kiev this weekend. I have no idea why not. No idea. Just do it. So then we get on to Schultz, right? And Schultz at the moment is getting some horrendous PR. I mean, I see everything on Twitter, and yeah, that's just a bunch of analysts and commentators and average Joes and me. But it's not looking good right across the spectrum of opinions. And this is where we can do a little bit of geopolitics. So Scholz is in a position, and Germany has long been a leader within, if you think of Angela Merkel, uh, of leading Europe and the EU and setting the standard and being the voice of the EU. Scholz has not taken the baton from Merkel. He has dithered because, and the question is, why? So people don't make rubbish decisions just because they're like that, right? There's always a reason. So Putin made a rubbish decision to attack Ukraine and invade Ukraine, but you know, what are the reasons? Let's unpick that. It's not just a stupid decision. So was it that he had incredibly bad intelligence and information? Almost certainly yes. Well, why was that? Why have we got the situation where this authoritarian leader gets to make this huge decision that's completely wrong and stupid? How do we understand that he doesn't have access to information? Well, he doesn't use a smartphone, he distrusts the internet. So okay, so all his information has to come from people handing him files. Okay, so that's filtered already. Okay, and then people are afraid to tell him things that he doesn't want to hear. Okay, and you start putting all these things together, and you get to a point where Putin makes a really bad decision. Schultz is making bad decisions here. What is behind that? He's not just waking up and going, well, I'm just going to say no to leopards. So what is going on in Russia, in Freudian slip, in German politics that means he is reticent to make that decision to be the leader in? Is it something personal with him? Is it something in the corridors of power in Germany that means that there is a pro-Russian sentiment that is very causally effective there? What is happening? We need to understand that, because if we don't understand that, then all we're going to do is just shout at Schultz and call him a douche. Well, he may be that, and he may also be making bad decisions, but still, why are you the person that's made? What is it about your makeup? What is it about your past that is leading you to calculate things differently to most other people? That understanding definitely needs to be had. But he is basically saying, and it's a line that German officials have repeated in recent days, that Berlin's decision on Leopard tanks is linked to the Americans' willingness to send their own A1 Abrams tanks, but they're not going to do that. Yet, while President Joe Biden's administration is gearing up to announce a major new US weapons package for Ukraine on Friday, the aid is not expected to include American tanks. Now, this is where it starts getting interesting. You get a bit of geopolitics going on here, which is France then recognize this and go, because Macron, I think, quite clearly wants to be the new European leader. And that's not criticism. I mean, if I was French, I would want my premier to be the leader in Europe. When we were in Europe, Britain were at the forefront of decisions being made. We had civil servants working on the policies in the EU. This is something that was somewhat not recognised so much when we said, "Oh, the EU are making all these rules," and the Leavers in the Brexit argument were saying that. Well, actually, we were part of that, and we were making those rules, and we had representatives over there, MEPs, making those rules. So, but I wanted the UK to be at the forefront of that because I'm British, right? So French are going to want Macron to be at the forefront of that. And here's his opportunity. So Schultz has been weak. You're going to start seeing Macron maybe go, you're not going to provide Leopards. We'll provide Leclercs, which is their equivalent of the MBT, the main battle tank. So again, Politico here reporting the French are also considering sending their own Leclerc tanks. It's all about opportunism, but hey, if it helps Ukraine, I'm fine with that. Tanks to Ukraine in a bid to provide Berlin with a joint framework for tank shipments. The subject is complicated and hasn't been settled yet in Paris, but we are thinking about it, a French official told Politico before nodding to an upcoming meeting on Sunday. We'll see what gets decided at the joint French-German cabinet meeting. So that's interesting. There's going to be a bilateral meeting there. A strong criticism is also coming from the Green Party, a junior coalition partner in the government, led by Scholz's Social Democrats, in a thinly veiled push for sending tanks to Ukraine. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock from the Greens said earlier this week that she hopes Friday's Ramstein meeting will set in motion decisions that will help Ukraine liberate more people. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said in Davos that the main message of the Ramstein meeting will be to deliver more advanced support, heavier weapons, and more modern weapons. This is in addition to what I showed you, he said earlier. More advanced support, heavier weapons, more modern weapons. There you go. That's given you the NATO permission there. Pressure for Germany to do more also came from Strasbourg. On Wednesday, the European Parliament passed a non-binding resolution urging Scholz to form an international coalition for sending Leopards without further delay. And European Council President Charles Michel told MEPs, and actually he's in Ukraine right now. I think he's just hopped on a train to Ukraine. The time is now, he says. Ukraine needs more military equipment. I firmly support the delivery of tanks. So everyone is saying tanks, tanks, tanks. Everyone is saying leopards, 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 apart from Schultz. What is going on? Why is that? And will this be the undoing of Schultz? Because this is not popular, certainly outside of Germany. Who is it popular with inside Germany? Who is he playing to? Who is he thinking? So, if you're the leader of a country, it's like, I'm going to make this decision because this will be popular. Like, there are two ways of doing politics. This is kind of politics 101. Do you, as a politician, lead your country or lead your constituents because you have the right information and the right ideas? And even if your constituents don't, and this is an unpopular decision, you're making it because it's the right thing to do, and you seek to bring your constituents along with you and convince them that your decision is the right thing to do. Or do you reflect your constituents by looking at what their opinion is and just do whatever they want? And you are this is representative democracy. They voted you in. What do you guys want? Right, that's what I'm going to do, and that's the decision I'm going to do. So if it's that latter, who is it in Germany that he is seeking to represent in making these decisions? Or if it's the first version of that, if he's making that decision because it's the right thing to do, what's his reasoning for doing that? What's his justification for not sending the leopards? That needs to be laid out really, really clearly. And just to confirm, as someone says, Abrams is a poor fit, entirely new logistics chain, different fuel, gas turbine engine, a huge retraining and learning curve. Leopard is diesel, far more familiar log chain and logistics chain, and far faster to learn. This is Germany desperately trying to think of another reason not to send. That diesel thing is quite a big thing. Abrams doesn't use diesel, which all the tanks, are in Europe. Basically, all the other vehicles use diesel. So that thing alone, an entirely different fuel logistics chain. Yeah, there will be vehicles over there, some 4x4s and whatnot that won't be using diesel, but it is a headache logistically speaking to start providing Abrams. And Wall Street Journal saying Germany won't allow allies to ship German-made Leopard tanks to Ukraine unless the US agrees to send American-made battle tanks. So this is also about not just the straight-up provision, but the export license. Now, Poland has had enough of German procrastination with permitting the supply of Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Permission, quote, permission is a secondary matter. We still either get it quickly or do what we see fit. The security of all Europe depends on it, he adds. So this is the Polish, this is Poland saying, okay, you might not give us the export permission, but sod it, we're going to do it anyway. And if they do that and other nations do that, what are the ramifications of doing that? And will Poland be taking the lead and other nations following? Will they follow suit? Really interesting there. And again, France is considering sending their own tanks, which, as this guy says, is embarrassing. Potentially embarrassing for Germany if France are going to get the one up on them. This is political brinkmanship, arguably, and France will only come out, you know, more popular than Germany in that respect. Now, I'm not sure about this. A British Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, so not Ben Wallace, our Defence Secretary, but the Foreign Secretary, said this country will supply Ukraine with 200 armoured fighting vehicles in a new aid package. Previously, their number was not specified. So 200, that was before we had heard hundreds and maybe 100 bulldogs, but now we've got 200 armored fighting vehicles. We don't know exactly what they are. Some of them will be the bulldogs, which are a bit old but upgraded, and it will contain another 100,000 artillery ammunition. I don't know if that is, if Noel reports it is specifying just what was in that package anyway, or whether we have agreed to another 100,000 rather than 100,000 previously. So that would be great if it ends up being 200,000. And finally, another sign of the power struggle in the Kremlin. This is a letter. This letter has emerged. It's leaked. It's written by General Gerasimov at the end of last month, and he confirms that Wagner is not part of the Russian army. Therefore, cooperation with the mercenaries is impossible. interesting. So we've seen so much of this play out behind the scenes, and in fact on the front lines, really as well. Um, in the Bakhmut area, there is this division in Russia that exists between the PMC and the regular Russian army and the people who head these institutions. Uh, and here is apparent confirmation, very explicit confirmation of a division there. Brilliant. More of that, please. Anyway, I will now. That's a really long news. I will now do my frontline update. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share.